Good morning. I'm Patrick Ralston. I'm the director of the Arkansas Arts Council, and welcome to 2021's ArtLinks conference. It's the first one we've ever done by Zoom, so we feel like we've got it under control, but bear with us today, and we've got a great program for you. We're focusing on art, communities, artists, and the hope that has sustained us throughout this pandemic and will carry us forward as we bounce forward into this new decade and try to rebuild from the pandemic, learn from it, but also build and strengthen our communities and continue the work that the Arts Council has done with its partners for over 50 years. And that is to build a sustainable creative economy that serves all Arkansans. I would like to acknowledge, just to kind of take us back a little bit, I want to talk about, I do want to acknowledge that Arkansas, even before we were a state, even before white settlers arrived here, was a land of rivers and forests and prairie and mountains, and it was a land of nations. And we want to honor today the First Nations that were here before the white settlers arrived, and that's the nations like the Tunica to the southeast, the Chickasaw in the northeast, the Quapaw, the Caddo, and the Osage. These are all nations that are recognized today. They still live, and their descendants still walk among us here on these lands under the same sky. And I honor their tradition and their contributions to the portfolio and the tapestry of art that is Arkansas's art and traditions. Because I never met a metaphor that I couldn't abuse and beat to death. When I look at the portfolio of art and the community of artists in Arkansas, it really is a tapestry, and it's a tapestry that certainly goes back before European settlers arrived, before wars, before disease, before the pandemic. And one of the strings that intertwines us as we come here as artists from different disciplines, arts organizers, conservators of culture, is hope. Hope has sustained us in a lot of ways over the last 2 years. We all dealt with the pandemic in a lot of different ways. Some of us coped by isolating ourselves and finding solace in our art. Some of us reached out and tried to build our networks virtually. There will be doctorates written for decades about what the pandemic and the isolation and social distancing has done to our psyche in this country and in this state. I suspect that MFA students at the University of Arkansas will be, in decades from now, will be talking about their grandparents and how their grandparents' art reflected the chaos of 2020 and 2021. Certainly in the areas of disease and isolation, also social justice. We've had a lot of conversation this year that will be reflected in the art. It already is. It's a very real-time transition that we see in our art. All of this affects our communities. We all represent in this group communities across the state of Arkansas. I'm looking here, and also, in fact, out of state. I'm looking at our registration list, and we have folks from everywhere from 21C and the Walton Arts Center in Northwest Arkansas, TRAC down in Texarkana, Batesville Arts Council, Main Street Batesville, Museum of Discovery, South Arkansas Arts Center down in El Dorado, Arkansas for the Arts, our statewide advocacy organization. All of these folks are part of our community, and community is really building a network, are intertwining ourselves in the tapestry. Again, kick that metaphor a little bit more. We at the Arkansas Arts Council, we feel like we tried to do some hand-holding throughout the pandemic, and we tried to do a lot of online content, and some was more unfortunate than others. Some of it was me coming on and doing lives every week, just trying to make contact with all of you. And people still ask me when we talk about that, they still ask me, the most important question is, when are you going to bring your dog back on? And when you're going to bring the lady in the cat mask back on? And that, of course, was Scarlett Sims, who was my partner in crime on that. It allowed us to keep in touch throughout our isolation and talk about the things, trying to sustain and find resources for artists and arts organizations, and to continue our good works. With that, let's talk about sustaining hope, sustaining our communities, and joining together and continuing to build this tapestry. And I appreciate all of you being here. Before we start out, I do want to thank the staff of the Arkansas Arts Council and the appointed members, the gubernatorial appointed members of the Arkansas Arts Advisory Council. These are the people that make this happen. The Arts Council staff is an 8-person staff, that's including me, and they work hard. And everything that happens today and throughout this conference in the next 2 days is the product of their work. And so I want to thank them. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jess Anthony. This is the most I'm going to talk through this whole thing. Jess is going to take over and introduce you to our panelists, and we're going to kick it off. Thanks again for being here.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jess Anthony, the Grant Programs Manager for the Arkansas Arts Council, and I also want to welcome you to ArtLinks 2021 Bouncing Forward. Before we get started, I'd like to point out that all sessions are closed captioned and recorded. Although you can see and hear the panelists, you as attendees are muted and cannot be seen. We do see who is signed in, however, and we'll be able to communicate with you if you need information. We also have a chat channel that is dedicated to tech troubleshooting. During the panel discussion, the Q&A channel will be open, and you will have the opportunity to post questions by typing them at any time during the presentation. Just click on the icon in the bottom menu. We will collect your questions during the discussion and pass them on to the speakers once we have finished their presentations. Our opening session this morning is called The Creative Place We Want to Live, and we're excited to have 3 panelists join us to discuss ways to use the power of arts and culture to build more equitable and sustainable communities. I'll let them tell you more about themselves, but to introduce them, we have Allison Esposito, who's the Executive Director for the Creative Arkansas Community Hub and Exchange, CASH, in Fayetteville. Allison is an arts administrator, lawyer, and artist from a family of artists with more than 12 years of change management experience in the philanthropic sector. She moved to Northwest Arkansas from Boston, where she served as Senior Director for the Arts and Culture Program for the Boston Foundation. Matthew Lee Erhlbach is a writer, actor, and organizer from Chicago and New York. He is the co-founder of Arts Workers United and Be an Arts Hero campaign, where he leads multiple state and national organizing efforts, works on policy, and lobbies Congress to make the arts and culture workers an economic and legislative priority. And third, we also have Kathy Liao, who's a member of the Artist Service Team at Mid-America Arts Alliance in Kansas City. She leads the planning and implementation of Artistsync, a professional development program for artists by artists. Through her role as educator and arts administrator, Liao facilitates building equitable, diverse, inclusive, and accessible community spaces that encourage collaborations and partnerships across the arts ecosystem. So if we can, let's start with Allison.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here this morning. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with so many of you. I still feel like a newcomer to Arkansas, having been here for 2 years, but most of that time, being here during the pandemic. So it's great to connect in this way and others, and it's good to see some friends. So yeah, the Creative Arkansas Community Hub and Exchange, or CASH, is a 2-year-old art service organization that works with creatives, communities, and organizations to empower a more inspiring, inclusive, and equitable Northwest Arkansas. So we're up in really the two sort of left, most left and most north counties of the state. But we are thinking very hard about how we're connecting to the rest of the state, and honestly, many adjacent markets as well, and just beginning to put our arms out and sort of make some friends and start to build pathways there. We, envision Northwest Arkansas as a place where creatives are equitably valued, and have been really leading with the concept that artists and creatives are the key to a thriving and innovative marketplace since we got here, and that self-sufficient and sustainable ecosystems are possible. We really think about the creative economy comprehensively and using an ecosystems approach. So while, of course, artists and nonprofit arts organizations and for-profit, creative industries entities are all part of our constituency, we're also concerned with government and academia and business and tribal nations and all kinds of things like this, and are really sitting at the intersection of all of these different parties, both on the supply and the demand side. Creatives are at the center of our strategy. We are really guided by a single idea across all of our work, which is that we're in service to artists, creatives, and culture bearers. And we want to serve them how they're working and where they're working. So whatever sort of business format they take or not, wherever they are showing up, that's where we want to be. And we really believe that the full potential within our state and within our region, both from a community perspective and an economic perspective within our creative ecosystems, is not yet realized. And if we seed the marketplace with committed strategic investment, it will eventually build a marketplace that is more self-sustaining. And so that's what we're really focused on. We're also thinking a lot about the democratization of arts, culture, and creativity to build an inspiring and inclusive creative marketplace. We value emergent design and the concept that, as none of us know what's really going to happen tomorrow, we have to consistently sort of be responsive and intentionally flexible to be supportive to the constituents that we're really here for. And so our team, which is entirely made up of artists of all kinds, all disciplines, many having lived in Northwest Arkansas for a very long time and deeply ingrained within our many, many communities, have been intentionally gathered to act and respond and pivot and understand the needs that come up on a weekly basis. I'll just share a couple of other points, and then I want to make sure I leave time for others, but really, we've been blown away. We're in an area in which there hasn't been a lot of data collection just around like who the heck is here and what do they need. And so we've started there during the pandemic and have really built a strategy for the next 3 years that has 3 buckets of work: research and understanding and mapping, empowering and building capacity for everyone as sort of the backstage entity supporting and connecting, and then in some instances creating things ourselves, platforms, real life experiences, online experiences for artists and creatives to engage in. But we've been doing all of this mapping to realize that there's enormous numbers of artists and creatives of all kinds. We think of creatives real broadly across all definitions of that word. And we've begun to build databases that we're sharing with the public of who's here, all very publicly accessible on our website through the Arts Resource Desk. We've been able to, through a number of different programs over the last 2 years, get about $250,000 out the door through a number of different programs and opportunities to more than 250 artists. We are, we're really working, I guess, at the intersection of thinking about what artists need. We asked them and we heard in March, and what we're thinking is, and what we're working on, space of all kinds, space for folks to create, money to create, professional development and wraparound support services to increase creative production and to feel like there is support at every level of your career, networks and connectivity and collaboration, and then opportunities and scaffolded gigs, so that folks have a chance to start building new audiences. And so for artists specifically, that's some of the way in which we're working, and I can share specific examples there. I'll stop for now.
Yes, the Arts Council is wanting to work with you all in the future to really to develop a statewide presentation of the arts economy. So we can hopefully talk more about that later. Matthew, do you have things you want to follow up on that?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And Allison, I love everything that you just said. Data, data, data. You know, over the last year and a half, the Be an Arts Hero campaign, which is becoming a 501c4, Arts Workers United, has used the data from the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, the Brookings Institution report, authored by Dr. Richard Florida and Michael Seaman, and the data from Americans for the Arts and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and taken this very dry data and given it life. And how do we take data that is just floating in the background and make it accessible and engaging for ourselves, for each other, and for our communities and for our legislators? And so what we found is we have a creative economy literacy problem in this country. And ironically, the arts has a story problem in this country. And so part of what we need to do is rewrite that narrative. And the way we're able to do that is through this data. So we can write a new story, this powerful economic story that is right here that can move the needle forward at the local level, the state level, and at the federal level. And so to zoom out for a moment, and Patrick, I'm also a sucker for a really good metaphor. One of the things that we've liked to say is, you know, our institutions, our cultural centers, our opera houses, our theaters, our dance companies, our museums are like stars, and they anchor this highly interdependent local commercial ecosystem. In that orbit is retail, hospitality, transportation, tourism. And when one of our institutions implodes, that creates a black hole in our communities. Now, if you multiply that across a state, that is an economic catastrophe of galactic proportions. If you multiply that across a nation, that is a universal economic collapse. So one of the things we've been trying to do is take this data and create a narrative, which, by the way, let's just talk about what those numbers are. 5.2 million arts and culture workers in the United States drive $919 billion across 435 congressional districts. That's 4.3% of our GDP. That's more than agriculture and mining put together, and nearly $300 billion more than transportation. And yet, there is a Department and Secretary of Agriculture. There is a Department and Secretary of Transportation. So it is unconscionable that an economic force of this magnitude does not have federal representation through a Department and Secretary of Arts and Culture. And so we talk about our local networks and federal networks. Well, what does a Department and Secretary of Arts and Culture do? We have the NEA, which is an incredible agency. The NEA, this is part of the story problem, is not an arts agency. The NEA is an economic agency that specializes in creative industry. So that's part of rewriting that story too. So every time we hear, oh, the NEA, you know, this political football, Big Bird, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, why are we giving money to these agencies? Well, if we had a federal representation with the Department of Secretary of Arts and Culture, coordinating with these agencies, coordinating with the Department of Labor, the Department of Defense, Department of Justice, Department of Transportation, working with those departments and also working with the state, local, regional arts agencies, workforce boards, nonprofits and for-profits across the country, then we can have a robust ecosystem that is working in coordination together, putting creative workers to work. And so we need federal representation. Part of getting that is through everything Allison just said, which is taking this data, spending money on the research, going to our local legislators and making the case, hey, we need to do this. We need to create, this is the other thing too, is it's not a very, it's a bad acronym, but it does a really powerful thing, which is CEDS. Comprehensive Economic Development Strategies, CEDS. And this is something that we're also talking a lot about. What a CEDS is, and some of you may know this already, probably most everybody knows this, but for those listening that don't know, a CEDS is basically a blueprint for a particular region's economic growth and resilience, drawing on that region's unique strengths, challenges, and history. It also refers to the process of creating this economic blueprint, which is meant to be updated every 5 years to be in conversation with the economy. And so what a CEDS does is allows local economies to seek investment from the US Economic Development Administration, the EDA, and get investment. So when we are empowered, and by the way, I'm a playwright and screenwriter who stumbled into becoming a policy writer and lobbyist last year. And one of the things I learned was, you know, how do we work as an artist? How do we work with our arts leaders, our local legislators, and our business leaders, our chambers of commerce, to begin this conversation? And again, to what Allison said, take this data and bring it to life. With that, I will stop monologuing, but that's what I got to say about that.
Kathy.
Hi, everyone. Matthew, that is incredible. I wish you can be my background, narrator for all my data stuff. So thank you so much. And Allison and Matthew, thank you both for what you've shared. And it's so wonderful to be able to hear from kind of the organization standpoint and how we're supporting artists, to Matthew, think about that bigger picture. So I'm really excited to be able to share this topic, the creative place we want to live, along with both of you. I kind of went the presentation route. So I actually did put together a presentation. So let me pull up my screen and dive into it. All right, can everyone see my screen? Awesome, let's go into the slideshow. So again, thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. First of all, I want to respectfully acknowledge that I'm on the occupied ancestral lands of the Osage, the Kansa, and the Ocheti-Shakawing nations, here also known as Kansas City, where Mid-America is located. And I am here to represent Mid-America. Mid-America is a regional arts alliance that serves the 6 state regions from Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, all the way down to Texas. And so thank you for inviting me to speak here today. This organization exists to activate, empower, and amplify community through the arts. And thank you for the introduction, Jess. My name is Kathy Liao. My pronoun is she, her, and I'm the Artistsync program specialist here at Mid-America. I work closely with individual artists through a program called Artistsync, a professional development program for artists of all disciplines, and it's created by artists for artists. And like many of my colleagues at the Artist Services team, I'm also a practicing artist myself, and you can kind of see my work on the side. I make paintings and large scale wall drawing installations. And in my other life, I'm also an art professor in the not so distant past of prior to COVID. In reflecting on this topic, the creative place we want to live in, I really want to be able to draw from my personal experience as an artist. So Matthew Lee, when you talk about how you went from that artist to the policy writer side of things, I really do think about that experience from my standpoint as well. And also in processing this last year and a half, the impact of COVID on all of artists' lives, on our community. And in a lot of the conversations, the individual conversations I had with artists, my peers, I want to acknowledge that this is not business as usual, and we have to reimagine and actively shape our programs for a better and more sustainable future for artists and for the community. So I'd like to start with the why. This is our guiding principle for our team here at Mid-America. The Artist Services team recognize and advocate for the value of artists in society. And we empower artists by activating possibilities and measuring outcomes. So that data part of it. We operate with the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and through our various customizable programs, we build springboards and pathway for self-determined success while supporting expanding network. We aim to meet artists and organizations where they are. Together, we're responsible and flexible ecosystems grounded in shared language, knowledge, and perspective. So that's the why. And I thank you for inviting me to this conversation, because I do want to come from that individual artist side of it. And that leads me to thinking about the ecosystem, right? So Matthew, you're talking about the ecosystem, the economy, the economic ecosystem of our country. And in the arts ecosystem, it is broken down to these various sectors, right? We have the individual artist at the center there. This is the beating heart of the ecosystem and the intersection of all the circles above. And the next we have that arts and cultural organizations, where Allison, where myself here at Mid-America occupies. We're the organizations that aim to serve and support artists, whether it's through providing funding, providing activities, resources, and in some capacity, we also serve as a gatekeeper role. The next level, we have the community, and you can see my little chart where the community intersects beyond just this arts ecosystem. We're thinking about how the community is engaging in the arts, who has access to the arts, and think about how that bleeds into all the other sectors across the entire community. And at the very top, we have the culture policy, thinking about the public funding and the legislation, the support from national, state, and local arts agency. This is the ecosystem that is intrinsically tied to each other, and the elements of the ecosystem flex and strengths, shaping the community we live in. But at the center of it is the artist. I think about in many conversations about art culture and speaking about art as an economic driver, even in talking about arts district and revitalizing a place, where are the artists? We don't have an arts ecosystem. Without supporting artists first, by centering artists, we start with artists as keystone to community building. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself and see how I fit into this ecosystem. I moved to Kansas City 7 years ago as an individual artist, trying to find my footing. And in this last 7 years, these are all aspects of who I am in my artistic practice and in my life. And for all of us, this is more apparent during COVID as our priority shifts, as things change within our lives. And this is just me. Imagine a chart like this for all the artists that you know and all the community members around us, right? In Artistsync, we ask participants to think about all aspects of their lives holistically in order to begin charting a path for a sustainable career. So in thinking about this, I do think about, as a member of this community, what type of creative place that allows me to thrive, not just to survive. What support do I need to thrive? Art does not happen in a vacuum. And in the new paradigm of supporting artists, we have to think about artist support. We have to think about supporting artists beyond just their artistic practice and see us all as intersecting identities as humans. And what do we need? Again, not to just survive, but to thrive. As artists, we are touch points across many sectors of this community. In acknowledging that each individual's need are often based on histories of exclusion from opportunities and resources, how do we create programming to support artists that is equitable, inclusive, and accessible? So I do think about the significance of creating a cross-sector network to create a place that artists can thrive. And if we think back to that arts ecosystem diagram, I feel like I am in a unique position where I do have touch point at this moment. I have touch points across the different ecosystem. But as artists, a lot of times there is that, we kind of have this myth around where artists is working away in the solitude of their studios. And there's often a lack of connection between arts organizations, the public sector, to artists working in their studio in their community. So in building a stronger ecosystem, we need to start building bridges. I saw this quote in a workshop I took with American for the Arts, and it says, if board members, staff, arts funders are does not intersect with artists and members of the community, what is their perspective informed by? So in thinking back to the why, these are the how that we build into our programming. In our programming, we want to be cognizant of every level of the ecosystem and create support and shared knowledge that allows ecosystems to be responsive and thrive as a collective. We start with artist input by listening and trusting artists and amplifying artists' voices. And at the professional development level, we build sustainability in organizations and artists' career through scaffolding, planning, and networks of care. So it's not, so we start by the individual artist, but we're also thinking about the organization. The organization has to be sustainable to be able to support the artists and to fulfill their mission. We think about building equitable partnership with accountability across the region and measuring outcome, right? Thinking about the data. How do we tell stories with data? Through program evaluation, longitudinal surveys. And in the last year and a half, we've done COVID-19 impact surveys to find out how are artists doing during this time. We expand network across disciplines and silo. And last but not least, tying to that bigger circle outside advocacy and affecting policy change. Thinking about how do we not only teach artists recognizing their own value, but also advocate, right? And see themselves as part of the society. Thinking about the Creative Economy Revitalization Act. How do we get artists to think about just how we exist in this economy? So the next slide, this really is shared to me by an artist, Tressa, at the Folk Alliance International. What if we replace gatekeeper with usher and help people find where they belong? By Margaret Killjoy. So I'm going to tie it all back to Mid-America and our professional development division here in the organization. This is the what, right? So I kind of talk about the why we're doing, the why behind of our thinking. So this is the what. At Mid-America, we build programs to address the why. Engage, right here, is a professional development program for small and mid-sized arts organizations to strengthen nonprofit management practices through governance, thinking about finance, and thinking about community engagement. And Artistsync here on the lower right is our professional development program for individual artists. So thinking about the different parts of that ecosystem and how we can work together to build a stronger place for artists to thrive. Artist 360 and Interchange are our grant making program that has professional development scaffold into the programming itself to continue to support and create a peer network for artists as they're working on their projects. In all these programming, the guiding principle is to meet artists where they are and allowing participants to shape their practice to their purpose and goals. Most importantly, these programs create the platform to build a stronger supportive network and to create a community of collaboration, of resource sharing and abundance mindset. So since, as you know, I run the Artistsync program at Mid-America, so I want to talk a little bit about Artistsync. Artistsync is a program that empowers artists of all disciplines by connecting them to tools, resources, and opportunities necessary to develop their entrepreneurial skills and strengthen their artistic practice. And under Artistsync, we have multiple different programming that find ways for artists to access these resources and tools. Artistsync Live is our capstone program. It is led by a team of 5 trained facilitators and designed up to 25 participants per cohort. Artistsync employs an innovative and rigorous 8-week class design that help artists learn and grow together through artist peer mentoring, small group activities, large group discussions, and knowledge sharing platform. One thing I do want to emphasize is we trust artists in that they have the knowledge. So all these programs are run by peer artist facilitators. So they're the one that is guiding the conversation, and they're sharing, artists are in the room sharing their experience with each other. And in that, building that stronger network. Each of these programming, Artistsync Live is an 8-week seminar. The Express is a shorter weekend intensive workshop that brings the opportunity to artists that is not within metropolitan cities, and it increases access for artists to attend virtually. We also have the What Works workshop, we have trainings, and the blog is a wonderful resource that is available to all artists. And what are the goals of Artistsync? One of our goals is to aid artists in identifying their values and goals to grow a sustainable artistic practice. And artists will walk away with the program with an increased understanding of planning and marketing relating to arts entrepreneurship. We also give artists communication tools, including brand statements, artist statements, elevator speech, and networking plans. But in the longer session, we also talk about finance, we talk about budgeting. So really take a deep dive into all aspects of tools for artists. We also inspire artists to engage with the creative community through equitable, diverse, inclusive, accessible collaborations and partnership, what that looks like. And last but not least, activating network and build strong supportive community for artists to thrive. So these are some of our testimonies from our facilitators and artists. So this is Liao. She is one of the artist facilitators in Northwest Arkansas. She's also a recipient of the Artist 360 grant. So this is what Leah says. Artistsync has been an important tool for networking and connection with artists and arts administrators, and has opened countless opportunities for interdisciplinary collaboration. Being a facilitator has brought a lot of richness to your practice and is a constant reminder of the magic that happens when like minds and hearts enter a learning space together. And I want to share this one because this is just too good. This is Outspoken Bean, a poet in Houston. And I love how simply he puts it. It started as a resource and then it became a lifestyle. So one of the things we see in Artistsync is what artists needed wasn't for Artistsync to fill information gap. So I think resources, knowledge, it is accessible, but these programs create that platform for connection, but also help them to develop a philosophy and the resource to perpetually fill the ever-changing gap that's happening around us. I want to come back to the data. So measuring outcome is one of our goals. From its inception, Artistsync is research-based and it is data-driven. Artistsync has the most comprehensive longitudinal database for artist professional development, tracking all the way back to 2009 in this country. So in terms of data, Artistsync programming does have an impact in measuring artists' outcome. And what I'm so proud of is this expanding network that continues to grow. So since 2009, we have more than 1,500 artists in 10 communities across 7 states that has completed the program. In the data, we do see an increase in functional knowledge gain, including strategic planning, use of resources, and there is an impact in applying what they learn into their artistic practice right after the seminar and longitudinally afterwards, from 12 months to 60 months and so forth. The perception of themselves has changed, of thinking themselves as entrepreneur. And one of the findings that I'm super proud of is many of them do respond that they have find their community to be a supportive environment for them to pursue their art. And last but not least, and this is, to me, this is kind of incredible to think about, of the ripple effect. So 96% of the participants at the 6 months post-seminar indicated they have shared these information from what they learned in Artistsync with artists who have not participated. So imagine that ripple effect. When I went through Artistsync, afterwards, I not only became a facilitator, but I also continue to share this information with my students, with other artists in the community. So imagine that knowledge ripple through the community. So you can find out more of those data on our website, Artistsync 10 by 10, which gives a summary of the longitudinal data of Artistsync and its effect on the community over the last 10 years. And I just want to end with this quote. The most important gap Artistsync fills for artists is learning the power of trusting artists, including themselves. So thank you so much. And you can find out more of the program at artistsync.art as well.
Thank you, Kathy. That's great.
Thank you.
Everybody, wonderful comments and ideas. Patrick, do you have some questions you want to try to go to the panelists here?
Yeah, well, and I'm going to still trying to figure out how these chat questions work. So I'm just going to, I got one from Simone Cottrell, who, this one's for Matthew. And she specifically asked, Matthew, reaching back far back into my high school, AP European history, we had a whole debate about why there isn't a federal arts department. What we settled on was how influential the arts are when tied directly with the government. What's your hot take on the potential, on that potential power couple, and with the influence they could wield with an economic lens?
Totally. First, Kathy, that was an awesome presentation. The work you're doing is absolutely incredible. That was really exciting. So if I understand the question correctly, it feels like the idea was that if government is involved in arts and culture, it could be maybe wielded for maybe nefarious purposes. And so decoupling that is a better idea, presumably. And then the economic lens part of it. I think that there's a couple things here. One, when this is brought up, federal level investment through a Department Secretary of Arts and Culture, sometimes you hear, well, we don't need another FCC. We already have an FCC and the FCC is not doing that. Or you also hear, we don't need a ministry kind of telling people what they can and can't do, or using arts and culture as a government tool for propaganda. If you were designing a federal department that is pure economic and putting creative workers to work through the Department of Justice, working in juvenile justice in prisons with kids, or adults in prisons, or in the classroom, or with veterans through drama therapy and music therapy, if you're really looking at this as jobs, because this is what we're all talking about here is jobs, this is labor. If you're looking at it through that lens, then what you're doing is creating an infrastructure that is, to borrow Americans for the Arts program, putting creative workers to work, which is what we need to be doing and thinking about because of what happens when we go into these communities on an emotional level, a cultural level, and of course the economic level. I'm going to get this wrong, but if I recall correctly, it's something like every dollar that the NEA invests, $9. Is it $9? Yeah. So, kind of, again, looking at data and looking at the math, how can we get more than $9? But also, if it's 9 right now, what does that look like in the community? If we do the math, what does that investment look like? So I think, there's a lot to be researched about the economic data and what the return on investment would be for federal investment at this level, which, by the way, there are 3 policies I should point to right now. One is the Creative Economy Revitalization Act, introduced by Rep. Leger Fernandez, and Senator Gillibrand just endorsed. This is the closest we've gotten to a kind of federal arts project proposal. There's also the 21st Century Federal Writers Project Act, co-sponsored by Rep. Leger Fernandez and Reps. Ted Lieu. That's for writers, and there's a lot to say about that. It's an excellent bill. And then, at a more local level, and this is, something we should all be talking to our legislators about, is the Performer Tax Parity Act, which would raise the ceiling from $16,000 to $100,000 for single filers and $200,000 for married couples, so we can write off our expenses as artists, which is going to put more money in our pockets, because as we all know, running a solo business, particularly as an artist, when it's feast or famine, we need as much money in our pockets as possible. So, these are 3 policies that I would just amplify for everybody in the immediate future. But I kind of answered that question and kind of didn't, so I hope that's sufficient. But let me know.
Thanks, Matthew. And I'm looking at our other questions here. We do have a question about, and I think this is kind of aimed more at Kathy, asking if any of our we have plenty plans to expand any of these programs. I think probably specifically Artistsync into Northeast Arkansas. And I know that I can speaking for the Arts Council. We we have looked geographically at some of these communities, but Kathy, I mean, kind of, and we've had conversations over the last year about how Artistsync, if as the Arts Council funds Artistsync at Mid-America, how can Mid-America target communities geographically or otherwise? Can you talk about the ways in which Artistsync can target specific communities and what the possibilities are?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Matthew Lee, I'm going to come back to what you just said too. Yeah, so we have worked with Arkansas Arts Council to roll out 5 Artistsync Express in 2021, spring of 2021, and we've worked with specific regional areas. So South in El Dorado, we're working with Northeast, we're working with Western Arkansas and Central Arkansas. So we did 5 of those Artistsync Expresses. And the thought at that time was, one of the goals for Artistsync Express is to create community. So by bringing artists in those regions together, so they have that network. It might not be right next door, but it's within that region that they can connect and find ways to collaborate and continue to have conversation and build momentum from there. Patrick and I and Scarlett, we've been talking about doing 5 more Artistsync Express for in spring of 2022. So there are more programming coming, and eventually it will lead to an Artistsync Live, which is the 8-week seminar across the state. At this moment, like I mentioned in my slideshow, one of the most important thing is listening to artists and finding out what they need. So we will be having info sessions and listening sessions just to find out what is a community need in terms of, as we roll out these Artistsync Express, if it's not regionally, how can we work with communities? What do they need? What type of information do you need? How can we support them through the framework of Artistsync Express in creating that network? So that's kind of the directions that we're going right now. And there will be more programming coming in the spring of 2021. Yeah, and I'm going to circle back just for a second because Matthew, I'm so inspired by what you said. And one of the things about Artistsync that we're thinking very deeply in our programming too is really connecting artists. As within Artistsync, we talk about goal setting. We talk about thinking about your own personal values, why you do the work that you do, how you create a sustainable career around that. But at the same time, also the conversation is to bring it back to that bigger level of not just, as long as you have enough, money to sustain your practice, but it's like, how do we support this collective of creative workers, right? Where do you fit in? What are the legislations that you need to, pay attention to? So those are things that we're thinking about too. So it's like the micro and the macro, right? Starting from the individual artist and having that information so we can support to create the community more sustainable in a way that is more sustainable. Thank you, Patrick. Sorry, I kind of went off topic just a little bit there.
Fine, you're good. You're good. Where it's all the same topic, parts of the same topic. Allyson, given your experience, which is your career in itself is kind of fascinating to me, and we're happy to have you in Northwest Arkansas. But given the unique experience of what we're seeing in Northwest Arkansas with Artist 360, also an existing community of artists who've been through, participated in Artistsync up there in the Arts Center of the Ozarks over the last decade. And where do you see, where's the future for this community building what is the direction that you see Cash taking to strengthen those communities even more? Is it, anything new that you want to tip your hand on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have countless artists. We have countless artists that haven't accessed those programs yet. And so it is really trying to find and reach everyone as a place to start and think about more equitably distributing the resources that are here to reach everyone. And that's very core. But I think I'll just like do some proper nouns and talk about some specific programs. So we, during the pandemic, were thinking a lot about the relief funds that we were seeing going out to artists everywhere. And, similar to what Matthew was saying, I think wanted to think about how we could get folks to work and really change sort of the value proposition there to say, we really value you, we want to get you working. And so out of the gate, one of the first things that we were able to do was create an online variety show of sorts called Ozcast, which provided a platform for more than 100 local artists of all kinds to either create new work or share work that had existed in previous format. And our team worked with artists and creatives really individually where they were at. If you haven't worked before in this sort of format and you need help with translating dance or theater or your culinary career to the video format, we were helping there. And from that, we learned that there was a pretty big interest and gap in wanting to explore more about getting work online, keeping work online, creating content, connecting Arkansas artists with the world. And so we've developed a program called Media Lab with Media Hub, which is providing tools, very subsidized rental costs to access those for artists and for nonprofit organizations, but more importantly, robust one-on-one training. How do you do this stuff right? What does it look like? How do you get things to look beautiful online? So we've leaned into some of that stuff. But I think, some of what you guys have been talking about is how are we putting artists at different tables? It's all about, for me, and I've been doing a lot of this work over my career. I believe firmly that artists and creatives are the innovators of our globe, and these are the folks at the cutting edge of thinking and sort of the mirror for what we're trying to figure out. And so, yes, we want to support artists to grow their careers, to have more opportunities to share their work, but we're also thinking and experimenting with what does it look like to put artists at the board table? What does it look like to put artists embedded within government? What does it look like to do some of these things? And these conversations are early, but a recent success that we've had in collaboration with the Jones Center, which is sort of a beautiful local YMCA-esque community center deep within one of our favorite communities here in Northwest Arkansas, Springdale, that really has a wonderful opportunity to redesign its external campus, which is massive. I'm going to screw up if I try and quote the number of acres that it is, but it's huge. It's many, many blocks. And they were really working with a design firm from elsewhere to think about what the design of the space could be and who it should be for and all of these things. Beautiful engagement process that we're helping on. But the end result was to say, we want to invite artists to sit at the design table and to help think about what the space should look like and to give them jobs in this regard to do this work. So we helped to run an open call and hope to select some artists that are now working in a very different way than they are working, applying the skills that they've honed over so many years of creation to help this beautiful and historic and very important to community place reinvent itself. One other thing I'll just say is, we're thinking the Art Center of the Ozarks is the oldest, cultural asset in Northwest Arkansas. It's been a 50, 60-year-old performing arts center. And during the pandemic, the organization, the theater company that had been running it, decided to move on from the space. And we've been working in partnership with the Tyson Family Foundation to reimagine that space as a creative cultural hub for artists of all kinds in a very creative and very diverse community here in Northwest Arkansas. And we've gotten the lucky opportunity to sort of really do the work how we always want to, which is to say, let's sit and listen and learn. We have an opportunity. Let's sit with the community for whom this really is for, and that's going to most use this to figure out what everybody wants this to be, and steward that process through and test and try some things. We have the time. We're in a pandemic. It's not that safe to bring folks in, to start doing productions of all kinds. And so we've been able to build a beautiful leadership body of young artists of all kinds to help us with reimagining the space, and are at a point where we're moving into implementation of those ideas, and it will involve changing the physical space and also a great deal of resources put out for artists to be in the space, using it in a zillion different ways, and using it as a space for collaboration and learning. So those are some of the ways in which we're working right now with artists.
That's great. And it's good to hear the story you're talking about the Jones Center. Of course, Ed Clifford, the director up there, is a longtime board member for Mid-America. And so he's, he gets it. And, that's a great collaboration. Thanks, Allison. I do have another question here, and this is directed at Kathy. And before I ask it, I want to clarify. I had a question a few minutes ago about when we were bringing programs like Artistsync to Northeast Arkansas. One of our regional Artistsync Expresses last year was actually in Northeast Arkansas, and so and we did have good participation there. And but we will be bringing more programs, and we have not mapped out exactly what communities, what our targets are. But again, stay tuned. Keep up with us on social media and at arkansasarts.org, which is our website. Kathy, back to you. I want to ask you. We have a question from specifically. Talk about Artistsync and its outreach efforts in Arkansas and elsewhere for artists with disabilities. How is accessibility play into the Artistsync conversation?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Patrick. And thank you for that question. With Artistsync, Arkansas, I think that's something that, like I mentioned before, we would like to set up these listening sessions and invite people to participate and to actually open it up. So we're not dictating this is how it's going to be. Here in Kansas City, we have run Artistsync Express and Artistsync programming with an organization here called Whole Person that supports person with disability to create programming that incorporate the arts, and even providing them with resources and tools to think about how they can utilize the art into something that they can do. In our programming, I think this is something that it is a continued work in progress for us. We are examining our program in terms of how to add accessibilities, whether it is access online, virtually, or in person. In doing the Artistsync Express program, we have learned that through these virtual programming, it does give more access for artists who may in the past have not been able to physically or attend programmings in person, whether it's the traveling, whether it's not being able to spend the time, 8 weeks to devote the time to that. So those are things that we're taking into consideration, whether it's through accessibility services such as translations or having someone in the room to support that. Those are things that we are building into the program as we move forward. And that includes application process, that includes our panel process. And yes, so I don't know if that answers the question, but that is an area that we are continue to work on, continue to think about.
Okay. Thanks, Kathy. And we've actually had a request from our panelists. I'm sorry, not from our panelists. I'm reading our comments here. To slow down your talking. Not sure. I guess this is about our closed captioning. So some of us are from. Some of us talk faster than others. And so I guess I would just say enunciate and make sure, because we are closed captioning this. I don't know how to slow down Allison Esposito's normal delivery. I don't think that's going to happen. But But we will definitely try to enunciate. You know, Allison, I'm going to double back to you because, you know, another question that we've been having is, you know, the other question is about you and I, of course, have been talking about the arts economic prosperity survey that six that is now coming out, the new initiative from Americans for the Arts. You want to talk a little bit about that? And you know, Matthew's talking, you know, is about the importance of data. And certainly, we have to have data drive the conversation on, you know, especially the legislative conversation on the creative economy. But you know, what's your Allison? What's your real world understanding of the value of having those numbers here in Arkansas, for instance?
Yeah, you know, I excuse me, and I will try to talk slowly. This is my lifelong albatross. Let's see if I can do it. Just like wave your arms if I start to speed up. A couple of things to say. You know, yes, Matthew and Kathy, data all day long. I think if we don't have the data to share, it's so much harder to make the case. And in every other place that I've lived and job that I've had, that's been the place to start, to really galvanize people around what to do going forward. And I have been, you know, honestly surprised to see where some of the holes are here in Arkansas around that, given that I know that arts and culture and creativity are driving tourism, for example, to a great effect. And so we are one of the, you know, the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study is Americans for the Arts, sort of long running program that mostly assesses the nonprofit sector and understands its economic impact on a state. And most of the states in the country participate, and Arkansas as a state has had yet to, you know, the opportunity to do that. And so we are with the Arts Council, as well as with our Kansans for the Arts, our advocacy agency, sort of stepping into the fray for the first time to understand that piece. And I think that will be the first step, because I again feel that understanding the economic impact of individual creatives, of the for-profit sector, and those pieces will have to come too in the future. But I'm very excited to start dipping our toe in the water with statewide information around the nonprofit. I have in other places that I have lived and worked in this space, seen that kind of information directly translated into hotel motel taxes and tourism funds, directly then turned around and invested in the amplification of arts and culture at the grassroots level, all the way to the largest institutions, with a deep understanding of exactly how much resource arts and culture is contributing. So I think that's one thing to say. The other is that we're in a state in which there's a lot of private resource, and I think we're at a moment in which there's some deep learning happening around everything that's here and all of the opportunities. And so it's not just for governmental use or for advocacy within sort of the public sphere, but also within the private. I think there's some great work that the data can help to shed some light on there. So I'm really excited to do that work with you guys. And I know it's just the beginning of what will be a ton of work. And I'll just say, with all of the different data work we're doing, and there will be a number of other areas that we're going to explore: arts education, the music, ecology, etc. Everything that we're going to study, we will, as we did with our Cash Canvas 2021, put everything online. We also believe in the transparent access to everything, so that folks, when writing grant applications or when seeking to tell their own story or to be advocates, have access to these points to be able to jump on board. So.
All right, terrific. Matthew.
Can I piggyback on that really
Please
quick?
do.
I think that what the data also does, and what it can do even more so, is make the case for arts and culture in schools. And part of, again, this kind of rewriting the narrative is, an orchestra class or a choir class isn't extracurricular or luxury. It's actually a trade. And I went to a music conservatory. I went to a trade school. I also went to a State University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and which had very strong programs. So if part of how we're looking at this data is how many students in this class go on to have a career in the arts or have an arts related career, playing a violin in the school orchestra, yes, there are X number of symphonies in this country and in the world you can play for. There's also arts administrators. There's also private violin teacher. There's also working at Arkansas Arts Council. There's all these different things you can do, but there's also the civic and social impact and learning how to collaborate. When you're working in a theater program, I wasn't very good in math, but I'll tell you, I'd be much more into math if it was applied to figuring out how to do a light grid. And a light grid for a play that is maybe about local history or about whatever. It's also teaching me how to collaborate. So we're in this moment, Patrick, as you said, where there's a real unpacking of and a taking into account and a reflective national moment for us. And I think that part of what we're finding is that our civics is broken. So yes, there's the data can prove the economic story, which is essential, but how do we prove the civic story and the social story of what arts do for us in schools as well? Because it starts there. When we integrate that as part of the DNA of our education, then again, it makes it much easier for us to get the appropriate legislation passed, the appropriate funding, and really the dignity of what it means to be an arts worker in this country takes a lot less work for us to have to prove to people because it's baked into what it means to be a citizen from the very beginning. So again, how data can help us at the very beginning tell this story and get what we need.
Great, I love that. What I'm seeing, and I'm looking at the questions that are coming in, and they're hot and heavy, and a lot of them are about role of the disability rights, artists with disabilities, representation, accessibility in our programs. Jenny Brashears asks, and this is a pointed question for folks like us who have boards and commissions. Do you have folks with disabilities or an advocate on your boards? I will speak for the Arkansas Arts Council. We have a governor appointed Arkansas Arts Advisory Council that is that has a relationship with the Arts Council staff in an advisory role. And I don't know that the representation of a person with disabilities has necessarily been prioritized in the past. To be quite honest, it's something that I think probably needs to be introduced into that conversation. It's long overdue, in fact. I will tell you that the work that we do as a state agency, Janet Perkins, our community development program manager, is also our what we call our 504 officer for working with the National Endowment for the Arts, and she has been extremely proactive in working with partners in the Arkansas disability rights community and with Mosaic Templars in our sister agency in putting together programs that talk not only about serving audiences with disabilities, but also serving artists with disabilities, people who are actually in the workforce. We've done about 5% of, even that, of what needs to be done in this area. But it is a conversation that I encourage, and we have representatives in our audience here from the disability rights community, and I appreciate you being here because this is a conversation that we will continue. But continuing Lindsay's question about boards and your advocates, Allison, Kathy, what do we know about representation on your boards? Or
yeah, I'm happy to jump in quickly. I think we've been incubating under our regional chamber of commerce for the first 2 years of our life as an organization, and we're hopping off and to be our own 501c3 here in early 2022. So we're just at the moment of forming our board, and representation is at the very core of what we're considering. We're not looking for necessarily a working board or a fundraising board. We're really looking for a board that is going to sit at the table and figure out the intractable issues of our time with us. And so, yes, we have inclusivity sort of at every layer there. And while that board is not yet finalized, absolutely we'll have that top of mind.
Kathy, I know that I sit on the Mid-America board, and I don't know, but I don't know that that's actually been a priority for Mid-America. Can you speak to that at all? I don't.
Yes, and I will be honest, I am not familiar with representation for disability on our board. And I also have to admit that I do not know every member of our board as well. So this is something that our team is working towards, and I know it is a priority of Mid-America, although I think at this moment, I do not know of any representation on the board. So I will be honest with that. And I know within our team, we do have advocates and we do have members who can speak to that. And I think that is something, again, I feel like that is a area that I have a lack of knowledge, and I am working on learning more and building into our programming. So thank you for that question. And that is a hard question that we all, as an organization and myself, have to examine and in thinking about building our program in the future.
Well, I kind of put you on the spot there because I'm on the board and I don't know everybody. It's a big board.
Yeah, it is a really
Patrick, I'm gonna step in here because we're running out of time.
All right.
And I want to thank you and all the panelists for an outstanding session. We're having wonderful comments from people listening in, and we're really excited to have you join us this morning. If other people have other questions and information you want to share, please write it in the chat box or send it to us at the Arkansas Arts Council. Our next session begins at 11 a.m. and it features Jennifer Hughes, who's the Director for Design and Creative Placemaking at the National Endowment for the Arts. She will talk about their Our Town grant, the NEA's Creative Placemaking Grant Program. Please use the Zoom email link we sent you to join us in about 15 minutes now. Thank you all again.
Thank you all. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you, Matthew. Good to see you, Kathy.
Nice to meet you.
See all of y'all.